Well, we've got a lot of things to cover today. I mean, a whole lot of things. We wanted to start out taking just a quick look back at a story that I don't remember if we even got to mention it or not, but we'd like to at least mention it now. And that is the story about, if you remember that experiment they were doing down in Brazil with those genetically modified mosquitoes that they were going to release.
Mm-hmm.
And they were put out by this company in England called Oxitec, and they had a certain gene that was a little bit different, and it was supposed to make it to where the mosquitoes they were releasing couldn't reproduce. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the general idea was, well, the normal mosquitoes will mate with these mosquitoes that can't reproduce, and then there won't be any further generations of mosquitoes reproducing. And over time, we will just simply winnow down the mosquito population by doing that. Well, guess what? That didn't work. These mosquitoes, apparently that gene that causes them not to be able to reproduce, number one, seems to have not worked. That's a big factor, I'd say, that it seems that gene didn't actually perform the function that they said it would. Which, when I think about this, I just think about the arrogance of the science and technology folks who, no testing was done on any of this.
Mm-hmm.
They have a scientific theory, which is, we could just change this gene and look, they won't be able to reproduce. But they didn't test it. They didn't test it in a lab or anywhere else. They just went ahead and released them and assumed they were right. Well, now it turns out they weren't right. There was a combination of both. The gene was apparently able to get through somehow, despite their best predictions that couldn't possibly happen. And in addition, apparently the rest of the normal mosquitoes kind of picked up on the fact that there was something wrong with these GMO mosquitoes. And apparently a lot of those female mosquitoes would not mate with these GMO male mosquitoes that they released. So they wound up creating this sort of...
They knew they were cyborgs.
Yeah, exactly. They could tell, hey, we could tell something's wrong with this right here. So they wound up creating this situation where you've got the mosquitoes mating with others and at a higher level to sort of cover the lack of mating population from these GMO male mosquitoes. And you've also got some of the genes getting through to the next generation for the ones that did mate with those males. Now, we don't know what the end result of all that's going to be. We just don't know what it means to have this kind of terminator gene get through to future generations because that was never supposed to be part of the deal. But what they've said is that, look, after this mosquito release was done, and it was just a couple of years ago, that it's been about 2 years since that was done. If you remember, we talked about it at the time as being kind of a crazy idea that hadn't been tested. But since that's been done, apparently the mosquito population hasn't declined at all. In fact, they're saying there's a more vigorous mosquito population in Brazil right now. And, of course, you can't say it's a direct result of this release, but there simply is a more vigorous, larger population. So the release of these GMO mosquitoes didn't work at all. The little experiment they tried didn't work.
Bigger picture, what is this categorized as when you look at environmental causes? Because we talk so much about global warming and doing things to negatively affect our environment. Here's a clear example of a negative effect on our environment, our ecosystems. And so who would be, these are scientists who are doing it because it's scientists and they're experts and it's trial and error. Are they exempt from getting that knock against them as, hey, you just did something to harm the environment?
Well, that's a great question. And I don't know how this would all work out under international law and other things, whether they could actually have any sort of liability for what they did here. I think they did it under the auspices of a government program. So they would be able to say, well, we were just working for the government. Of course, the government has what's called sovereign immunity, that generally you can't sue the government. I don't know exactly how this would fall into that category or not, because I know sometimes you can sue the government for negligence in different situations. I bet you that this would never fly because you've got the international aspect of it. You've got a British company operating in Brazil. So first you got to have somebody in Brazil sue, and then, of course, you've got to have real damages, which is part of the problem. We don't know what's going to come from this at this point. We don't know if there are going to be any long-term real damages. We don't know if they've created some kind of hybrid mosquito, although those theories are out there if you read the stories, that this could have created some kind of hybrid, like you said, cyborg mosquito that's now going to manifest in future generations in some way as, millions upon millions, probably billions of mosquitoes reproduce, and we play out the gene pool to see exactly where some of, the different modifications could go with this gene pool. So, the truth is at this point, we don't know what the damages are exactly, and I'm glad you brought up climate change or global warming, because we do want to talk extensively about that today. And, we promised the listeners we'd have some of the statements that have been made in the past about where we were going climatologically in our world. And we've got those here for you today that we want to get to. So my message to folks who are listening would simply be, and I'm sure you could see this message, scientists don't know as much as they say they know. They always say they know exactly what's going to happen in the future, right? That's not science. Predicting the future and saying this is exactly what's going to happen isn't science. Science is taking a theory like that, a theory, I think this is what's going to happen, a hypothesis is a better word for it, a hypothesis like that, and then testing it. Using a controlled study. You test your hypothesis, and then if it passes enough tests, then you have a theory, right?
And we know studies have to have a lot of components that are accurate through.
Right.
Have to have the right sample size, the right group that you're looking at.
There's a lot that goes into designing these things to make sure they're scientifically valid. And even once you've got a theory, that's got to be tested and retested and proven to be right over and over again, and then you get to what's called a law. But even laws are subject to reconsideration later. We're talking about things like the law of gravity, right? So even though that's a law, to date, we still don't really know how gravity works. We can describe the effects of gravity, but we don't understand its function, its mechanism. So even though we're talking about a quote-unquote a law that's, what you might say almost set in stone, we still don't really know how it works scientifically. So for all of our great scientific knowledge, one of the things I think that we forget is the demonstrated history of being wrong over and over and over again. And maybe we ought not be so sure we're right today, because we can look back even just to our recent past, and we can see all these statements that we've made that we've said, oh, this is science. And it's turned out to be wrong. And the arrogance of people who don't see that, to me, is just really shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's probably going to be a lot of big fat bats and dragonflies now in South America.
That's right.
Let's hope so.
Well, and what happens to, do they somehow get these Terminator genes into their bodies just through ingesting the mosquitoes? I don't know. That is possible. That is possible. So it's highly unlikely, I think, because generally the mechanism of getting these genes into your bodies doesn't go through the digestive system. But here we are again making assumptions that we know exactly how this stuff all works. And I think the truth is we really don't know. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.